Hi guys, this is my review for Resident Evil Apocolypse, the second film in the franchise. Milla Jovavich was back for this one. I think she was the only person who came back from the first movie because everybody else dies. But this is a direct continuation, storyline-wise. Events pick up exactly where they left off at the end of the first movie. Actually, I think the second film starts just before the end of the first movie, but things mesh together very well, and the two films have a very different feel. The first movie had a very small cast of characters trying to survive in this dangerous underground laboratory. There were lots of tight-knit corridors and cramped spaces. It was very claustrophobic. Second movie has this massive sandbox in this open city where tens of thousands of people are trying to survive the zombie virus. It's a totally different feel. Now, in terms of how this relates to the video games, Resident Evil Apocolypse, or Resident Evil 2, if we're going to give it a number, uses material from both the Resi 2 and Resi 3 games. Now, normally, I'm not a fan of when movies rush things or cut corners when it comes to adapting games or books, but in this instance, I think they did the right thing for two reasons. Firstly, the Resi 3 game was a sidequel rather than a sequel. It featured events happening at the same time as the events from the Resi 2 game. Now, I know S.t.a.r.s 3 and S.t.a.r.s 4 in that particular franchise tried to do films happening at the same time, but for the Resident Evil franchise in the middle of the noughties, back before cinematic universes were fully a thing, I'm not sure that would have been the right route to take. Also, the Resident Evil 3 game features probably the most iconic villain in the whole series, the Nemesis. So by using material from 2 and 3, you get to have the Nemesis in your second movie. What you've got to remember as well is that when the first couple of Resident Evil films came out, they weren't monster hits. I mean, they were moderately successful financially, but it's not as if the first Resident Evil film came out and it was like, whoa, we got this mega hit on our hands. It's going to have like 8 or 9 movies. It's going to be huge. They did okay, just enough to get a sequel. And then when the second one came out, that did just about okay to get the next film. But from following the release of the films at the time, it was more a case of them trying to just about do well enough to maybe squeeze a trilogy out of it. There was no real talk of it going on for 4, 5, 6 movies. If I start talking about S.t.a.r.s again, which came out roughly around about the same time, that was a different thing. I mean, when the first 2 S.t.a.r.s films hit, everybody was talking about it becoming the next Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday, running for 9 or 10 films, because proportionately, based on what the S.t.a.r.s films earned to what they spent, I mean, they were colossal hits. Resident Evil films cost a lot more to make, might well have made more money than the S.t.a.r.s films, but proportionally to what was spent, they weren't a bigger thing box office wise. It was only when the series got to its 3rd, 4th film, somehow it started making more money as it went along, especially internationally, to the point where when it got to the 6th movie, possibly they were making more money at that point than they were even in the beginning. They could have gone on if the desire had been there from Paul Anderson and Milla Jovavich, but I think they sort of ran out of steam creatively and they made the decision that the 6th film was going to be their last before they went into it. So getting back to my point, the Nemesis being in the second movie, I think they wanted to put the Nemesis in there just in case the second film was the last one. The Silent Hill franchise did the same thing, because when they brought out their movie, they put in the big iconic villain, the Pyramid Head, straight away into that first film, even though in the games the Pyramid Head didn't come into it until the second game. But they wanted to leave it all out there. They didn't want to take the risk of doing a fairly unsuccessful Silent Hill movie and then thinking to themselves, well, why don't we just put the Pyramid Head in there and go for broke straight away? So that's kind of the strategy, or the way that I read it. So let's get into the great things about this film. We'll start off with the positives. Firstly, the action. This is definitely an action horror franchise. Some people might say that it's more style over substance. You think about the motorbike going into the church at the start of this film, and that ridiculously over-the-top shot of Alice stood there with 2 guns, and then there's flames rising up in front of her in slow motion. But it looks great. It's so much fun. My personal favourite moment is later on when she flicks a lighter in slow motion. It goes through the air, and then there's 2 characters sliding on the ground underneath her. If John Woo had directed a horror film in the noughties, it probably would have been Resident Evil Apocolypse. But if you're still watching these by the time you get to the second movie, I think you sort of accept the deal that these films are going to be like that. A lot more style, and sometimes the action won't quite make a whole lot of realistic sense. The plot has a strange structure in that a lot of the main characters sort of do their own thing for the first two acts, and then everybody kind of meets up in one big group for the final battle. So we sort of have to sacrifice a lot of the usual group camaraderie that would be built up across the course of a movie for the sake of the story, which is fine. It's not like any of the individual threads are dull. So we've got the LJ character. His journey through the city is very comedic. We've got Carlos and his umbrella buddies. Their segment is very action orientated. They're mowing down zombies with machine guns and throwing grenades and stuff. And then you've got Jill's gang, which is a more traditional horror segment. They're in the church with liquors and the dark graveyard. So there's a lot of variety in the stories that we follow throughout the movie. Going back to LJ for a minute, he's probably one of my favourite characters in this. The first time I watched Resident Evil Apocolypse, I thought he was going to die at any moment. I'd love to know what this guy is supposed to be when he's not surviving a zombie outbreak. He's apparently just randomly walking around with two gold-plated magnums in his pockets. I love the scene where he's driving along and he spots two naked zombie hookers, so he sort of glances at them and that makes him crash his car. I could just imagine guys doing this for real if this film was real. The Carlos segment, the scenes that you see where they're helping the police on the streets and the zombies are coming at them from all angles, this is actually lifted straight from the cutscenes of the third Resident Evil game. And I think there's actually a scene involving Alice later on, which was lifted from the fourth Resident Evil game, Code Veronica. I think Oded Fehr might be the name of the guy who plays Carlos. I think I might have got his first name wrong there, but he was very good in the Mummy films as well. I like all of the Umbrella soldier characters in this. There's not a single one among them who's like, oh, this is ridiculous. We should have stayed on the helicopter where we would have been safe. They're all fundamentally good guys who've got absolutely no doubt in their minds that the right thing to do, get down onto the streets, into the hot zone and help people out, even if it ends up costing them their lives. I like the fact that it's shown in this that the Umbrella employees, not all of them are bad, some of them are good. And the first film showed this as well. And it's not just the grunts. There's also a character called Charles Ashford, who's a leading scientist. He's so far up the food chain in Umbrella that they send a special car out for him when the outbreak hits to try and get him out of the city. And then you've got a guy called Major Kane, who is totally the opposite of Carlos and Ashford. This is a guy who will quite happily let people die if it means that he stays in place high up the food chain and he gets his next bump up the ladder. I don't remember him being called Major Kane in the movie, and I've seen this film many, many times. I wonder if he's named at all. I had to look up his name on Wikipedia before doing this review. I do find it strange that they had Ian Glenn come in as a sort of secondary villain for the last scenes. I mean, if you've got Ian Glenn, surely you would make him your main villain and the other guy would be the secondary villain. I can't help but think that Ian Glenn was deliberately put there as a placeholder just in case they did get that third movie. I guess that kind of worked out for Glenn then, but I like the fact that there are so many multiple endings in Resident Evil Apocalypse. The first film did the same thing as well. Just when you thought the main action was finished, there were more developments, more twists. I can't remember if this goes on to be a common thing throughout the third film, fourth, fifth and sixth. I guess we'll see when we get to those. The Jill Valentine we get in this feels very different from the one that we get in the games. I mean, I like this version as well, played by Sienna Guillory. I might have got that name wrong as well. I like that she doesn't let her ego get in the way of the fact that Alice is clearly the strongest member of her group and should be treated as such. I think the way Jill dresses to go to the police station first thing in the morning is completely over the top. You just wouldn't wear a dress like that if you were a cop and performing cop duties. And the way that she behaves when she gets into the police station, just randomly blowing zombies away without telling anybody what she's doing. If this was real life, she'd probably get killed on the spot in the chaos. And there are other cops stood behind the zombies that Jill's killing. If she was off by even like an inch in any of those shots, then she'd be killing her own colleagues. So you've just got to sort of ignore these little things and go with it, enjoy it for what it is. The Nemesis portrayal in Resident Evil Apocalypse is very accurate to the games. It's a lot of fun watching bullets bounce off this thing. I like the fact that he goes "s.t.a.r.s" just like he does in the games. That's a nice touch. He's not overused in this film, which I think was a good thing. Possibly it was really awkward to film somebody trying to pretend to be an 8-foot monster with all that makeup on and stuff, but his scenes are kept to a very minimum, and they're very good scenes. The one where he turns up at the police station and kills all the s.t.a.r.s members is brilliant. And then LJ's just left standing and the Nemesis leaves him alone and walks away. Superb. And then just before that, he kills that guy in the cowboy hat on the roof who just can't believe that this thing has turned up. Brilliant. There's also a scene later on when the Nemesis chases Alice, which feels right out of the video game. That's a great scene as well. Although this is probably a good time for me to now go into the remaining negatives that I have, which I haven't covered already, because even though I enjoy the Nemesis chase with Alice, it does feel like the Nemesis is missing with his chain gun when Alice is only 10 yards away, and yet 5 minutes earlier when he's killing the s.t.a.r.s members, he's picking them off with perfect accuracy like he's the Terminator or something. So I don't know if there's an element of the Eric character deep within the Nemesis, which is just making him miss Alice. Possibly. Also, I kind of watched this film and wish that there had been a more faithful representation of the police station. We do get to see the police station a couple of times in this film, but it would have been cool if we'd have spent half the movie in the police station, just like it was in the video game. It could have been like Assault on Precinct 13, but with zombies. That would have been awesome. I hope they come back to that idea in the future. I'll also say that the Alice character feels a bit robotic in this sequel. I still enjoy watching her take the fight to Umbrella, but you don't get to find out anything about her in this film that we didn't already know. She's very cold. There's a deleted scene where Jill asks her why she joined Umbrella. This would have been an interesting thing to find out, actually, but Alice just dodges the question, basically, so I can understand why the scene was deleted. But I would have liked a little bit more about the human side to her. I know she's been given all these enhanced abilities, but that doesn't mean that the character itself has to turn into somebody who doesn't really have any kind of personality. So I would have tweaked the script a little bit when it comes to the Alice scenes in this, but on the whole, she's still very fun to follow. Another thing I'm going to mention just before I wrap up is the fact that I noticed on this most recent rewatch that this film is not very violent. I mean, if you consider the fact that people are dying to monsters and getting shot and stabbed and dying in all sorts of nasty ways, the blood and gore count in this film is very, very low. It was really noticeable this time to me when I was sort of keeping a critical eye on things to try and spot things I could talk about in my review. So I think they really should have upped that. This film does have a little bit of a PG-13 feel to it, which is not ideal when you consider what the subject matter of the movie is. I think I mentioned this in my review for Resident Evil 1 when I was talking about the guy who gets killed in the lift, and if that was a Romero film, you'd get to see all the guts coming out and everything. But actually, all we got to see of that character's death in the lift was just a load of bodies converging on this guy, and you don't get to see anything of what's going on underneath. But this film is still excellent, so let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 out of 5 for Resident Evil Apocalypse. That's the same score that I gave the first movie, so the excellent standard continues for the second film. Will it continue for the third? We'll find out shortly, because I will be back in the not too distant future to do a review for Resident Evil Extinction. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.